There are 12 vintage cookie jars that can be worth far more than they look, and you may have seen one without giving it a second thought. It could be sitting on a kitchen shelf, tucked away in a cupboard, packed inside an attic box, or still sitting in the kitchen where your parents or grandparents kept it decades ago. And that is what makes old cookie jars so interesting. Most are not fortunes. Many are worth only a few dollars or perhaps a few dozen. But certain manufacturers, character designs, early examples, rare colors, unusual variations, and exceptionally well-preserved pieces can bring hundreds or even thousands from collectors. The important thing is knowing what you are looking at. Because the difference between an ordinary old cookie jar and a highly collectible one is often surprisingly small. Sometimes it is a mark underneath. Sometimes it is the original lid. Sometimes it is a particular color that was produced for only a short time. And sometimes the jar looks almost exactly like a common version sitting beside it. So before you put an old cookie jar in a charity box, sell it at a yard sale, or throw it away because it looks dated, have a closer look. And let me be honest about something first. Owning an old cookie jar does not automatically mean you own something valuable. Age alone is not enough. Condition matters, authenticity matters, rarity matters, and perhaps most importantly, collectors have to actually want the thing. But once you know what to look for, these jars become much more interesting. Number 12. Vintage advertising cookie jars. These are among the easiest to overlook because they were made to advertise something rather than simply decorate a kitchen. Older jars associated with recognizable food brands, bakeries, restaurants, or household products can attract collectors because they combine kitchen history with advertising history. Most ordinary advertising jars are modestly priced, but unusual examples with strong graphics, scarce production, and excellent condition can bring considerably more. Your first check is the underside. Look for a manufacturer's mark, a company name, a copyright notice, or a molded-in design. Do not assume an unmarked jar is worthless, but a clear identification can make research much easier. Condition is particularly important with advertising pieces. Original colors, lettering, and decoration are part of the appeal. A jar with heavy fading or a repaired lid may be worth considerably less than a clean example with its original finish. And there's another reason these are worth checking. Advertising collectibles are often collected by people who have no interest in cookie jars whatsoever. Someone might collect the brand, the restaurant, the advertising character, or the history of the company. That additional collector base can create demand where you might not expect it. Number 11. Vintage glass cookie jars. Glass sounds ordinary, but old glass cookie jars can be surprisingly collectible, particularly when the shape, color, manufacturer, or construction is unusual. Clear glass examples are often inexpensive, but colored glass, pressed glass, carnival glass, and unusual molded designs can attract collectors. The first thing to check is the glass itself. Look carefully at the thickness, color, seams, and molded decoration. Old pressed glass can have manufacturing characteristics that differ from modern reproductions. A molded design that looks like a simple decoration may actually identify a particular manufacturer or production period. And do not throw away an old metal or glass lid. Completeness matters. A beautiful vintage jar without its original lid can lose much of the appeal that made it collectible in the first place. Number 10. Mid-century figural cookie jars. Now we begin entering the world of character cookie jars, where the shape of the jar itself becomes part of the collectible. The 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s produced enormous numbers of whimsical kitchen objects. Cookie jars were transformed into chefs, animals, children, fruits, vegetables, houses, and cartoon-like characters. Most were affordable household products when they were new. Today, some are highly sought after. The important distinction is that not every mid-century figural jar is rare. Your test is to identify the manufacturer and the exact model. Turn the jar over and examine the base. Look for names, numbers, initials, impressed marks, or paper labels. Then compare the design carefully with known examples. The smallest variation can matter. A particular color combination, facial expression, handle, lid, or accessory may identify a different production version. And condition becomes extremely important here because raised noses, ears, handles, hats, and other projecting features are exactly the parts most likely to chip. A jar that has survived 60 or 70 years with its original finish intact is much more interesting to collectors than one that has been repaired or repainted. Number 9. Vintage animal cookie jars. Animals have always been popular subjects for kitchenware, and old animal-shaped cookie jars remain a favorite category among collectors. Dogs, cats, bears, pigs, chickens, elephants, roosters, and other animals have appeared in countless designs. But again, the animal itself does not determine the value. The manufacturer, age, rarity, design quality, and condition do. Look closely at the face. That may sound strange, but character details are often one of the easiest ways to distinguish different versions. The eyes, ears, nose, markings, colors, and shape can all change from one production run to another. Then, look underneath. A manufacturer's mark can turn a mystery jar into an identifiable collectible within minutes. And don't assume that a jar with a little wear is automatically worthless. Some honest age-related wear is acceptable to collectors. What they generally dislike is damage that has been concealed by repainting or restoration. Original is often more important than perfect. Number 8. Disney and other licensed character cookie jars. This is where popular culture enters the picture. Vintage character cookie jars featuring famous cartoon and entertainment characters can have a strong collector following, particularly when the jar is genuinely old, scarce, and officially licensed. Disney pieces are an obvious example, but the principle extends much further. The character alone does not make a jar valuable. There may have been thousands or even millions of examples produced. What matters is identifying the exact piece. Look for copyright information, manufacturer marks, production labels, and construction details. Compare the proportions and colors carefully because reproductions can resemble older pieces surprisingly closely. The lid is especially important. A missing or incorrect lid can turn a complete collectible into an incomplete one, and collectors generally know the difference. And this is one category where nostalgia can have a powerful effect. A character that reminds someone of their childhood can create demand that has little to do with the material value of the ceramic itself. Number 7. Rare ceramic and pottery cookie jars. Some of the most interesting vintage cookie jars were made by pottery companies whose names are themselves collectible. A jar might look like an ordinary piece of painted ceramic, but the manufacturer, pattern, glaze, or production method can completely change the story. Your first check should be the base. Look for impressed marks, painted signatures, paper labels, model numbers, or factory symbols. Then examine the glaze. Collectors learn to recognize particular colors and finishes associated with certain manufacturers and periods. A rare glaze variation can sometimes be considerably more desirable than a standard version of the same design. This is also where age can become meaningful. A genuinely early example, made by a respected manufacturer, may have considerably more interest than a later reproduction that was deliberately made to look old. That distinction is critical. Old-looking is not necessarily old. Number 6. Rare figural character jars from the 1930s through the 1950s. These deserve special attention because they come from a period when decorative kitchenware became increasingly imaginative. A cookie jar could be designed as a person, an animal, a piece of produce, or a miniature scene. Some were deliberately humorous, while others were made to look almost like small sculptures. The best examples combine several desirable characteristics. They are early, they are identifiable, they are relatively scarce, they retain their original decoration, and they have survived complete. That last point is something people often underestimate. A lid may seem like an insignificant piece, but the original lid can be essential to the design. If it is missing, collectors may be forced to search for a replacement, and the replacement may never be quite right. So if you have an old cookie jar without its lid, don't immediately assume it has no value. But if you find the lid later in the same box, keep it with the jar. Completeness can make a major difference. Number 5. Rare McCoy cookie jars. Now we reach one of the names that serious American pottery collectors recognize immediately. McCoy produced a huge variety of pottery, including cookie jars, and some designs have become particularly collectible. But there is an important warning here. Not every McCoy cookie jar is rare, and not every example commands a high price. The exact model matters, the mark matters, the color matters, the condition matters, and reproductions and later pieces need to be separated from genuinely desirable vintage examples. If you find a jar that appears to be McCoy, don't stop at the name. Study the base, compare the mark with documented examples, examine the glaze and construction, look for damage and restoration. A common example may be worth a modest amount, while a scarcer model in excellent condition can attract considerably more interest. This is the pattern you should now be noticing. The name gets you into the conversation. The exact version determines whether the conversation is interesting. Number 4. Rare Hull cookie jars and unusual pottery examples. Hull is another name that can make collectors stop and look twice. Vintage American pottery has an enormous collecting community, and cookie jars connected with recognized pottery manufacturers can be much more than simple kitchen containers. The first thing to understand is that a pottery mark is not automatically a guarantee of a huge value. Collectors want the combination of manufacturer, design, rarity, condition, and demand. Examine the base carefully and look for the appropriate mark. Then compare the shape and decoration against reliable references. Do not clean away old labels or aggressively scrub the surface. A little dirt can be removed later. A damaged original finish cannot easily be put back. And if the jar has an unusual color, unusual decoration, or an especially distinctive shape, investigate before assuming it is simply another example of a familiar design. Number 3. Rare promotional and character jars with original packaging or accessories. At this level, completeness becomes extremely important. A vintage cookie jar that originally came with a box insert, advertising material, spoon, accessory, or other related component can become much more interesting when those pieces survive together. Collectors are not simply buying a container, they are buying a surviving piece of history. That is why an old cardboard box sitting in an attic can sometimes matter more than people realize. Never throw away original packaging simply because it looks worthless. The same applies to old receipts, instruction sheets, advertisements, store tags, and paperwork. Provenance does not automatically make a common cookie jar valuable, but documentation can help establish what an object is when it was purchased and where it came from. And that information becomes increasingly useful when dealing with scarce collectibles. Number 2. Exceptionally rare vintage cookie jars in original condition. At number 2, we are less concerned with one particular manufacturer and more concerned with the combination of everything that collectors value. Imagine a genuinely old cookie jar from a desirable manufacturer. The design is scarce. The colors are original, the glaze is intact, the lid is present. There are no major cracks, there is no obvious restoration, the manufacturer's mark is clear, and the jar has remained remarkably close to the way it left the factory. That is the kind of combination that can transform a modest collectible into a serious one. The important thing to remember is that condition is not simply about whether something looks clean. A jar can be spotless and still have been repainted. A little surface wear may be perfectly acceptable on an original piece. Collectors are often much more interested in authenticity than artificial perfection. So if you discover an old jar that appears unusually good, don't immediately polish, repaint, or restore it. Identify it first. And if it appears genuinely scarce, get a qualified opinion before doing anything irreversible. Number 1. The rarest and most desirable vintage cookie jar examples. At the top of the market, the most valuable cookie jars are not valuable simply because they are old. They become valuable because several rare qualities come together at once. The right manufacturer, the right model, the right period, the right color, the right condition, the right provenance, and above all, strong collector demand. Some highly desirable vintage cookie jars and related figural kitchen collectibles have reached substantial prices, but exact values vary enormously depending on the model and condition. This is why you should be extremely cautious about online listings claiming that an ordinary cookie jar is worth thousands simply because someone has listed one for that amount. An asking price is not a sale. A completed auction or documented transaction tells you much more. So if you believe you have one of the genuinely scarce examples, don't base your decision on the highest number you find on a marketplace. Find comparable completed sales, confirm the manufacturer, confirm the model, confirm that the piece is original, and pay close attention to condition. Because this is the real lesson behind the entire world of vintage cookie jars. Value is rarely sitting on the surface waiting to be noticed. It is hidden in the details. Before you put an old cookie jar in a donation box, ask yourself a few simple questions. Who made it? When was it made? Is the mark on the bottom consistent with that period? Is the lid original? Has the jar been repaired or repainted? Is the design common or unusually scarce? Is there an unusual color or variation? Does the condition match what collectors want? And most importantly, has anyone actually researched the exact model rather than simply guessing from a photograph? Because a cookie jar can be worth $5, $50, $500, or considerably more depending on those answers. And the strangest part is that the most valuable one may not look valuable at all. It may be the jar that has spent 40 years on the same kitchen shelf, collecting dust while everyone in the family walked past it. So look underneath. Check the lid, study the markings, protect the original finish, keep the packaging, and never assume that an old-fashioned object is worthless simply because nobody uses it anymore. The next time you open that cupboard and see an old cookie jar, don't just see something your grandmother used to keep biscuits in. Look again. There may be a story underneath it. And if you're lucky, there may be considerably more than a story.